Breaking and Entering podcast goal is to help aspiring advertisers break into the industry by listening to success stories. In this episode, we speak with Tim Nudd. Tim Nudd is editor-in-chief of the Clio Awards, editor of Muse by Clio, and host of the podcast Tagline. Previously, he was creative editor at Adweek. Tim has covered creativity in advertising for many years and knows the difference between good and bad ads. I had to have him on this podcast after listening to Tagline, his podcast. Tim and I will speak about his work on Tagline, where he dives into classic commercials and campaigns by talking to the people who made them. I may be biased, but listening to Breaking and Entering and Tagline consistently might be the recipe for a superstar career in the business. And I'm sure creativity is what led you to this podcast. Being creative for a living is something special. Muse by Clio is a publication that celebrates just that. Tim sent a list of resources that he's curated just for you, and to see those, you got to head to our Instagram at Breaking and Entering Pod. And Chicago Portfolio School supports this episode. It's a one-year portfolio school option that produces books that some of the best agencies in the nation want to hire. So go check out the recent graduates' books for yourself at chicagoportfolio.com. This is a really interesting episode with Tim, and he'll share a lot about what goes on behind those superstar ideas, and I'm excited for you to listen. Now, on with the show. This is the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast, and as usual, I'm your accomplice, Gino Schallenberg. Kick it, Mikey. All right, Tim Nudd, welcome to the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. This is going to be a fun one.
Yeah, I'm psyched. It's great to be with you, Gino.
So you are the editor-in-chief of the Clio Awards and editor of Muse by Clio. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, I've been those things for almost 4 years now.
And previous, you were at Adweek for a while, correct?
I was. I did 2 tours of duty at Adweek. The first one was sort of late 90s to early 2000s. And then I went back there. I always sort of did some work for them through the years, but yeah, I was the creative editor there from 2010 to 2018.
And what have you covered throughout your career?
You know, my first job out of college, I was a journalist, and I wanted to be a journalist in New York, so I moved to New York. My first job was working at a collection of oil and gas industry newsletters, which I did that. I worked there for about 3 years, and I met a bunch of folks that became lifelong friends, but it did not really do it for me in terms of the subject matter. I mean, oil and gas is a huge story. It's probably arguably the world's biggest story financially, but I just, I was always interested in creative work and creative people. So as soon as I got to Adweek in 97, started writing about advertising. And I've written really about creative advertising ever since, with some detours here and there. I did some pop culture writing for People Magazine and others. But yeah, it's been primarily, looking at creative advertising. And it's been such a fun industry to cover. There's so many talented people in it. So much interesting work being done, and yet at the same time, there's not a ton of media coverage of that work. So, it's nice to be sort of, I guess, for want of a better phrase, like a bigger fish in a smaller pond. Like there's so much media coverage of creative industries like Hollywood and the music industry and all that stuff, and gaming. I think marketing often gets kind of short shrift. Obviously, people don't look up to advertising as much as they do to other things. So it's been a really wonderful little niche to sort of, build my my career around. I've been really grateful.
Yeah, and you're doing really well, and you've been doing well. What was the first campaign you might have covered in advertising?
The very first. This is a funny story. Like the very first spot that I really got a chance to go deep on for Adweek was in 99. It was the Guinness Surfer commercial, which is, it's been at the top of so many lists of best ads ever. And I think the British public voted it the best commercial ever made sometime in the 2010s. So yeah, it was one of those things, like at the time, we used to wait for the mail to arrive at Adweek to be able to see the commercials. This was like pre YouTube and pre really sort
Wow.
of any sort of streaming video. So
Right.
3/4 inch reels would arrive, and we'd all sort of pile into the video room, and we'd check out the work. And yeah, I mean, that was Jonathan Glazer, obviously Abbott Mead Vickers BBDO, like amazing spot for Guinness. That's still one of my favorites. And yeah, I got to call up Walter Campbell and Tom Cardy, the creatives on that. I was sort of terrified at the time. I was like, a young writer, and had a great chat with Walter in particular, who gave me all this sort of background on the spot. And it was really my first kind of foray into learning the backstory of these great ads, which is something I'm still doing today.
Oh, and you do a great job. I mean, the Tagline podcast that you've been running. When did that start? Because that's basically what you do on this podcast. I listened to it. I saw it through Adweek's Best Marketing Podcast. It is like an ESPN. I read Adweek say this, so I'm taking it from them. It's like an ESPN 30 for 30 behind some of the greatest campaigns.
That was the sort of the idea was, let's go back. I mean, the genesis of that whole thing was 2019 was the 60th anniversary of the Clios. And so during that year, we were spending a lot of time looking back at classic work anyway. And so my buddy Dave, who writes for me for Muse, I had him sort of look back at 15 different campaigns and just speak to one person for each campaign. So there were a lot of these going back to the 70s. We even found someone who had worked on Hilltop, the old Coke ad. And we had one person per campaign for 15 campaigns, just kind of tell us a little story about making it. And I looked at these responses that we were getting, and so a lot of these stories, like, we'd never heard before, or nobody had ever really heard before.
Right.
And I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to speak to more than one person per campaign? Pick a campaign and maybe speak to 5 people or 10 people, and just everyone you could find who had different roles in the creation, whether you're a creative director or the talent or the editor or the director, or even sometimes, we'd speak to wardrobe people. And like, it's just, going as deep as we can on these classic spots. And, they are old spots. So in some ways, the advertising world has changed since they've been made. But I think that in most of them, there's a lot of stuff that's still relevant to talk about. So it took a year or so to sort of get the ball rolling on Tagline. Taglinepodcast.com is where you can see it if you're not familiar with the Muse site. It's also on the Muse site, of course. And yeah, we started it. We had a season 1 last year, or earlier this year. I'm not sure exactly when this will be airing, but yeah, March to May of 2021 was when we rolled out season 1. We did really fun collection of spots. We looked at the most interesting men in the world campaign for Dos Equis. We looked at Got Milk. We looked at Volkswagen's Little Vader. We looked at Like a Girl. We looked at Under Armour Phelps and Motel 6. So a lot of interesting old campaigns that I didn't know a ton about. I knew the sort of broad strokes of many of them.
Right.
But just the details of how this stuff comes together is always fascinating to me. And it's and one of the things that I find really interesting about it is, it's not just the creative stories that are interesting. It's the client stories. It's the account stories. It's the strategies. Like everything that all the work that doesn't necessarily get the attention of the creative community. That some of these folks are the smartest folks working on the account, bar none. So that's what I've found really fulfilling, is sort of getting a more 360 view of how these things are made.
And it's so interesting, especially like from the client side. And the risks that I was listening to the Dos Equis one a couple days ago, like the risk that they had running the ad. And, you really have to, creativity takes courage.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the Dos Equis is a great example of, a client that wasn't sure whether it was going to work, and different constituencies within the client. There were actually 2 brewers that they had to convince. I had to get through Heineken, which was the distributor, but also CCM in Mexico, which was the owner of that brand. And the owner, CCM, they were very, very suspect in terms of the creative. They looked at the scripts and they were like, "What are you guys doing? Why are we even partnering with Heineken if they're considering this work?" And That's one example where luckily the work went into testing and performed spectacularly on the Millward Brown stuff, and
Right.
they were able to sort of push it through because the CMO and CEO had believed in it. But yeah, I mean, the client in that one, Willem Vanderhoven, he's one of the best voices in season one. I mean,
Oh yeah.
He's got a great view, and he's just he's all in on risk taking on the client side, which is of course what you want to make a difference.
I'm reading here. I wrote down like the fight for creativity is a noble fight, but testing helps ease clients. I remember the testing is what really was able to help them push through once they saw how successful it was.
Well, and these stories are more common than you would think. So I'm currently working on an episode for season 2 on Real Men of Genius, the Bud Light campaign, and it's a very similar story. And in fact, Andy Golar, who was the CMO of Bud Light at the time, he's back in that same role now. When he first heard the DDB's first sort of finished spot, this was before he greenlit the campaign. They sent him a cassette, and he was playing it in his car after he landed one day from a trip, and he hated it so much he literally threw the cassette out the window.
No way. So
here's one of the here's a campaign that would go on to be top 5 of all time on radio.
Yep.
And the client hated it at first, and didn't get it at first, and that happens too. So the client, you have to have a partnership there where there's trust, and eventually they would go on to do some testing of the campaign in different markets, and of course the rest is history after that. But yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful uncovering these case studies, and the truth of these case studies versus what you actually see in an official case study. That's what's so wonderful. Like talking to Willem about the Dos Equis work, you can get a sort of an unvarnished look at that because he's not with Heineken anymore, so you can sort of talk a little more freely about it. So, but yeah, these stories are great, and like I said, they're not just creative stories; they're strategy stories, they're account stories, they're business stories, and we try to make them equal parts kind of insightful and entertaining. That's kind of the idea, is to make them fun to listen to, but also you learn something.
Yeah, I also didn't realize, because just not being around, is the importance of the director of the commercial. I didn't realize how much weight that had into the creative process. So that was really interesting, especially for I believe it was the Volkswagen episode with the Force. That was a big decision that they had to make between 2 pretty famous directors.
For sure. I mean, the director really brings their own vision to things, and they, in the best case scenario, will elevate the concept, elevate the work for sure. I mean, the Volkswagen one was interesting. That was Lance Accord who eventually directed that, and he was one of the few people who declined to chat with me about that, which was disappointing. But I chatted with many directors. Steve Miller, who did the Dos Equis work. Martin DeThura, who did the Under Armour Phelps spot. I mean, many of the directors are happy to chat. And for season 2, we've got quite a few directors. Andreas Nilsson, Epic Split, and some others too. It's been amazing to chat with them too, because they're obviously they're executional. They speak in a film language, not necessarily the same creative language the agency folks have. And just what does it take to execute on these visions that these agencies come to them with? It's pretty interesting.
Why do you think, for our audience, which is aspiring advertisers looking to break in, why would it be helpful for them to listen to Tagline? I have my thoughts, but I want to hear from you.
I think the main reason it would be interesting for them is that it really takes these classic pieces of work kind of off the pedestal. I think when campaigns are so sort of iconic, they can seem like unattainable. Like, oh, how could I ever possibly dream something like that up? Like, that's sort of not aspirational in any way. Like, it's admirable, but it's daunting. I think what these stories do is they explain that, none of these campaigns arrived fully formed, really. I mean, they all came about through missteps and second chances, and often just complete rethinks. So to me, that makes them more attainable, more aspirational, more inspiring than they were before. So I think uncovering sort of the nuts and bolts of the process, kind of warts and all, makes advertising just seem more doable to people entering the business. And I think that's fascinating. There's all sorts of examples of campaigns that went on to be famous that in the early rounds of concepting, it was very different, and it was not as good. And all that refining I mean, it's the Bud Light one that we're working on now. I managed to get a hold of some old demos of like when they were workshopping different voiceovers and different music, and you realize when you hear the alternates how great the finished product really was. So yeah, I guess to me it's like that's the thing that people coming into the business can take from this is like you don't have to hit the home run on the first pitch in order to come up with a great campaign.
Yeah, that's good advice in general. I love it. And I think if I were to recommend, I mean, I think this podcast here, Breaking and Entering, is great to get you in the door to figure out how to land it. And then your podcast paired with it would be two great resources for my audience.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you're very much focused on what folks coming into the business should be thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, my show is really about folks who have reached that level within the business, but then, how did they do it? Like, how did they get to the point where they created something special? And it's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of luck, and it's a lot of stars aligning. But many of the episodes we've done, I think, is interesting too, because it shows you the opportunities can really come from anywhere. I'm thinking about like the Johnny Walker, Robert Carlyle film. Like that was not even supposed to be a public facing film. That was supposed to be an internal project for some sales folks at Diageo, just talking about the history of the brand. And like, the about us page of every company is like the most boring page on the internet. So they somehow managed to take the history of this brand and turn it into this sort of incredibly artful thing that found an audience well beyond what it was intended to. And there's examples of that everywhere. I mean, radio, nobody looks at radio these days and thinks there's a creative opportunity. But then when you listen to some of the great radio work being done, it's like a junior team would probably be put on that first, and
Mm-hmm.
that can be an opportunity as well. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned, from iconic work for folks just starting out.
Love it. I love it. We actually had a guest, Ben Majoy, a couple episodes ago, probably from the time this is airing. He was tasked with the Taco Bell menu and created stories off the menu as a creative experience where people would overlook as an opportunity to.
Yeah, that sounds like a fascinating sort of media.
Yeah,
piece of media to get to work on.
Yeah, but yeah. So Tagline podcast. Where can they find that? On every
taglinepodcast.com. And yeah, you can search on, Apple or Spotify or anywhere else for Tagline. You'll see Ashley Epping's wonderful little design that she did for the show. And we're thrilled to be, heading towards season 2 coming in February. But there's plenty to listen to from season 1 as well.
I love it. When is season 2 come out?
So our goal, and I think it's going to happen, is the Super Bowl got pushed back this year to I think it's the 13th of February. So we're going to probably launch a week after that. So somewhere around President's Day, like February 20th, 21st, or 22nd, somewhere in there. So, and this year we're going to do, I think, every other Monday instead of every Monday. So the season will stretch from February probably to the end of June. We're going to have 10 episodes, and we've got a lot of really fun stuff coming. Like we're going to do an episode on Skittles and one on the Dove sketches piece. I mean, we're working on so many at once right now, but they're all coming together, and I think there's going to be a nice mix, something for everyone.
Yeah, they're really well produced, and your storytelling is phenomenal. So I highly recommend.
Oh, thank you. Well, again, if you saw my first drafts, even the first mixes I get back, I have to, I bother the editor by switching things around. I mean, again, it's like building something from scratch. It takes a long time, and like the first iteration is often just doesn't sound great. I've learned to be like, I have to take a deep breath before listening to the first mix, because I know I've screwed up a bunch of the storytelling and it doesn't flow properly. And if you saw my Google Doc from like the first round of fixes, you'd be like, it would not seem as great as it turns out. But I appreciate you saying that. I do think they're turning out well. And more than anything, just getting these stories, out of people. I think these episodes will hopefully kind of live on and be sort of a nice snapshot of a special moment that each of these brands has had.
Absolutely. So now I want to back it up and talk more so about the Clio organization and then Muse by Clio
Sure.
specifically.
Yeah.
So take it from there, like because Muse by Clio, you started or you helped start.
I did
Uh,
start it, yeah. So the story there was, I'd spent a lot of time at Adweek, which it's a great magazine. It's a great platform. They have a huge audience. I was looking to just sort of try something new, at the time. And
right.
Nicole Purcell, who runs the Clios, she and I had talked for a little while, about what would it look like if we were to start something together and create some sort of content division of the Clios. So the Clios, they've been around. It's been around 60 years. It's sort of the preeminent, advertising award show. Certainly going back to the 60s and 70s.
Mhm.
There's famous scene in Mad Men that takes place at the Clios, and Clios have been a part of American pop culture in a way that all the other advertising shows out there, Can, One Show, D&AD, all great organizations too, but they just haven't been in American pop culture the way that the
That's
Clios have.
right. Being in being in the world here in advertising, I know I'm familiar with all the other awards, but how has the Clio transcended those boundaries?
Well, the Clios were on television for a long time, in the 70s and 80s, and I think it was just, it was much more well known to American audiences than any of these other shows. A lot of these other shows sort of arrived a bit later as well. So yeah, I mean, it's obviously the advertising awards landscape is there's plenty of shows now, but I think the Clio does hold sort of a special place. That people know it, and folks just in the regular world who not in advertising probably know Clio's more than they
Yep.
know any other one. And I had a good relationship with Nicole, so we decided to give it a try and start something from scratch. I mean, my situation in 2018 was Adweek. They obviously had a very mature content business, and they were trying to get more into awards and events themselves, and that was sort of the growth area at the time for that magazine. And to me, I focus more on content than awards or events. So coming to the Clios was great because they have a very mature events and awards business, and they saw their growth area being content. So it was a good
Interesting.
fit. It was a good fit for me. It was a good fit for them, and we launched Muse in the summer of 2018. And we've kind of been building it, ever since. We have a lot of franchises on the site, content franchises that the trades don't really have necessarily. I mean, the big difference is we cover creative work only, or creativity only, so that we don't cover personnel news, generally speaking. We don't cover account shifts generally, unless it's sort of extraordinary or has a creative impact. And that's really what we focused on. And we focus on creative work, we focus on creative ideas, and then we try to have a little different spin on creativity as well. So we have series like Art of the Album, where we ask people to talk about their 10 favorite album covers, and we have workspace series where people talk about their offices and how their offices sort of foster creativity. We have a few different video interview series. We have Black Tea, which is with Black women in advertising. We have Long Story Short, which is with emerging talent, mostly filmmakers and editors. So I think our content mix is a little different, but it all goes back to the Clio DNA of celebrating creative people, creative work. So it's a nice synergy, and I work with Dave Giannattasio, Angela Natividad, Amy Core, like three folks who are wonderful at what they do, and the four of us kind of tackle this stuff together. We're a very small team, compared to the trades for sure, but we feel like we're carving out kind of a niche on our own, and the podcast is part of that. The different content franchises we have are part of that too. So yeah, we feel like we're different, and we feel like we're getting some attention, which is nice as
Interesting.
well.
How are you guys looking to grow? What's your vision?
Well, the Clio organization is certainly, we're part of that. So their growth strategy is our growth strategy. So it's primarily built around the awards. That's the vast majority of our revenue. So we certainly support the awards in many ways. We do content around the awards. We help drive entries. I think just getting Clio into the conversation in the ad business every day.
Okay.
Creates a halo effect that hopefully helps entries. I think it does. Muse is also generating its own revenue nowadays. So we have sponsors on the site, and we have sponsors of the podcast, and so we are also driving towards being our own self-sustaining piece of the
But
business.
there's no paywall on Muse, correct?
There's no paywall. Not to say we would never have a paywall. I mean, I understand the pressures that digital media businesses have. We have them too. We're lucky, though, to be part of a business that, currently the awards help us not have a paywall. So we can welcome more people and do it that way. But yeah, we currently do not have a paywall. Maybe one day.
Gotcha. I want to go over, you recently published an article called The Year in Creativity for 2021, 100 takes on the year's best and brightest ideas, which is an interesting article. You interviewed 100 people, or you might have had some help too, but what were some of the main trends from 2021 that you noticed interviewing these people?
I mean, listen, like, it's been a weird couple of years, right, with COVID, and I think 2021, to me, the overarching trend was sort of an emergence from 2020, where productions and strategies were kind of locked down, and there was a lot of uncertainty. A measure of normality came back this year. But really what that piece was about, and those are, I did all the reporting for that, and those are, many friends of mine in the business contributed to that piece, and just a lot of agencies that I have a lot of respect for. And we really just asked them, what was your favorite piece of work that you made this year, and what was your favorite piece that someone else made? And then we asked them also for kind of a prediction for the coming year. So the piece is really about, the story is really about individual pieces of creative work and what, why they worked, why they were interesting. So, I mean, for 100 folks, there were some duplicates here and there, but not many. I mean, a few pieces like, the Lost Class that Change the Ref did, that came up a bunch. But yeah, I mean, I think what you could take away from 2021 is that marketers stepped away from the sort of short-term tactical survival strategies that a lot of them had in 2020, and started to think a little bigger again, with brand ideas that will hopefully drive some growth in business. But it's interesting. I mean, I think if you look at both Adweek and Ad Age came out with their best ads of the year for 2021. I looked through those pieces, and it's clear that this past year did not have as many, even 2020 didn't either, by the way, but didn't have a ton of really big, well-respected, commercials or productions. So I think that, we're still in that phase where it's a little bit on the smaller side. Not to say there wasn't great work being done, because there was, but it was, I think in different media platforms, not necessarily the big film productions we've seen, 2019 and before.
Yeah. What about 2022? Any predictions?
Oof, man, I don't know. We're knee deep in Omicron as we record this, so I don't know. I mean, it's difficult. I think we've all learned to get along in this world that we're currently in. And I think advertising is getting made again, and I hope that the one thing I think has been really missing from advertising the last couple of years is just the sense of humor, and we get a little bit of that. Of course, purpose is very important, and companies need to do that and need to really care about more than making money. I think that's been made clear over the last few years. But also, I just feel like advertising should be fun. Where's the comedy? Where's the humor? Where's the sort of not taking yourself so seriously? If you're somebody who encounters an ad in the world, it should sort of be worth your time to engage with it. It should be entertaining. It should be give you a smile or a laugh. And I think humor is in difficult times like we're going through, humor is, I think, a great coping mechanism and a healing, thing, and just a fun thing. And I would like to see more advertisers really try to get back to that instead of taking themselves so seriously. Maybe 2021 or 2020, maybe 2022 will be time for that. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, we will. Hopefully. Now, I want to get into some advice for our aspiring advertisers. You've covered creativity for a long time. You've talked to some of the best in the business. What are some of the common trends or personalities or skills that you've seen in those that are successful in the industry that you should tell our audience to learn as soon as possible?
Well, I would preface this by saying I've never worked in the industry. I don't really understand what it takes to become successful within the industry. I cover great work, but I know it's, a lot goes on behind the scenes. To me, the folks that are most successful are the ones that are generally the most curious, and the ones that sort of, are able to find what makes us, the commonalities that bring us together, and express that in the work. Like, I think, looking back, and again, Tagline factors into this too. If you look at the kinds of campaigns that we've covered, there's always some sort of truth at the bottom of it, that's very universal in some way, like a human truth. And so being open to those, and then just absorbing as much as you can. And I would say not just, industry media. I mean, as much as I would love everyone to be on Muse every day and listening to every, podcast that we do, I think it's just more about just being, engrossed in culture, and just, being aware of what's happening in the world, and being inspired by that stuff. And so the people I think have the most success are the ones that are just naturally drawn to the most disparate and diverse inputs, and I think that's really helpful. And then, learning the history of the business, I think is helpful too, just to see what's been done, and to see the different types of strategies that have been deployed in different industries. I think that's useful. So, getting involved in ad Twitter, and getting involved in, some of the award shows, and just being a part of the industry, but also having an aperture that's like a bit bigger than just the industry, I think is really helpful. And then just being a good person, like advertising certainly has had problems through the years, with different characters, and it needs to get more diverse. It needs to get, less insular. And we're making progress in that regard. It used to be a boys club, and that's changed hugely. And we need to, now make sure that diversity is, it's an embarrassment right now in the industry in terms of its diversity. So addressing that, it's only going to help your business to address that as well. So there's a lot of issues. But if you're a person coming in, I think just being open, absorbing culture, being interested in all different types of culture, that's probably step one to being a great creative.
Do you see a lot of creatives transitioning over to the journalism side, what you do, more the covering of creativity?
I've seen it more the other way. I've seen a lot of reporters go to agencies over the last 10 years, which I think is interesting.
It is interesting.
Not a ton coming the other way. I think most folks in the advertising journalism space are coming from a journalistic background. But I mean, there's, it is interesting having, the point of view from where we come from, seeing a lot of stuff every day versus working on 3 or 4 accounts and having your head down on those accounts. It gives you a bit more of a bird's eye view, I guess. But a lot of friends of mine from Adweek and Ad Age are doing great at different agencies.
Have you ever thought about making the crossover?
I have not really. I mean, it crossed my mind here and there, but I love to write. I love journalism. I love this whole podcast thing has given me another sort of some more wind to my sails in terms of different types of storytelling. I spent many years writing 500 to 800 word stories, and these are 10,000, 12,000 word scripts that I'm doing now for this podcast, and it's been a different type of challenge. It takes a long time to get one made. Like Dos Equis, I think we interviewed a dozen people over the course of several months, and then you've got 12 long transcripts that you then have to sort of piece together into a story that makes sense. And that's really challenging and takes a long time. And I've learned to have a little more patience maybe than you would need to write a 500 word story. So that's been good for me. And I mean, also I don't really have clients, so journalism's probably better.
How many people are on your production team for this podcast? I'm curious.
Well, it's really just myself and the editor.
Wow.
So Lane McGibney is my editor. He's down in Alabama. He's wonderful. He's been doing a great job on this stuff. So yeah, I mean, I have some colleagues obviously at Clio's who have great feedback on each episode before we finalize it. And I mentioned Ashley Upping, she's the art director of Muse by Clio. She also runs the Clio program on the award side. She's incredibly talented and has been wonderful in terms of providing design work for us and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think we're having a great time with it, and I think it could last for a few more years. We'll see.
As long as there's good creative work out there, I
There's
think you
plenty
can
of it, right? Like
yeah.
I mean, if you go back to even just going back to like say 2000, right? Like 20
Yeah.
years. I mean, there's so many. There's probably a couple hundred campaigns you could do.
Oh yeah.
So
So you've got the content,
yeah,
and
I think it's fun. I mean,
it's great.
I always wonder if people really want to stick around for an hour, because these are about an hour long. I think half hour is, we had this talk internally, like, oh, isn't a half hour kind of more digestible? But you can't tell these stories in a half an hour, really. Like the stories are as long as they are, just because that's the story. Like that's
Right.
if you cut, if you cut them out. I mean, we've done a few that are like 40 minutes that work fine. But the more I do these, the longer they seem to get, actually, which
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a great sign. But
Well, they need to be as long as they need to be. I think that's the only case. And I'll pick it. I mean, I can't always finish it on one listen, but I'll pick right back up, and it's easy
Mhm.
to pick right back up.
Yeah. Well, I think it's worth, you know, like you say, the folks who are into it are really into it. So I think it's worth sort of giving them a little bit more and having it be a bit more detailed, because who knows, which parts different people will find value in.
Yeah.
So, I like to balance it out with as much, kind of entertainment value as well as insight as I can, and have it be kind of a mix of the two. And yeah, I've got a few coming this spring that I'm really excited about. This Skittles one is really interesting.
What's the Skittles campaign?
Well, it's the old Blank the Rainbow that's been running for 20 years
Okay.
now. It started
Yeah.
in 2004.
Oh, what agency did that?
It was shot at New York, so
Okay.
Jerry Graff and
Oh, of course.
Scott Petrone, Ian Reichenthal, those
I'm
guys.
trying to get Jerry on the podcast, so if you can tell him, come
Jerry's
on.
wonderful. I mean, he's so articulate about the creative process. I mean,
Perfect.
it's amazing to kind of chat with him about,
Yeah.
and what's interesting about Skittles, again, it's like you think of that stuff as a creatively driven, kind of wacky creative campaign, but it was really driven by strong strategy. Like they really dug
Absolutely.
deep into the teenager circa 2004 when that campaign started. And the pop culture at the time was this weird mix of real and surreal, and
Interesting.
the teens live at this intersection between the real and surreal, like the sort of dreaminess of childhood, the reality of adulthood. They're kind of caught in between. And like you think about that campaign and how that really dug into that, that transitional phase between what's
Mhm.
real and what's magical. And I mean, it's fascinating to really hear how it was made, honestly. So
Oh, I can't wait.
it's not just Jerry; it's all the creatives and the guys that came later. Scott and Eric. I mean, it's remarkable stuff. So that one's great, and that's just one of 10 that's coming this spring. So
Oh yeah, I'm excited. I recently discovered the podcast, and now I'm hooked. So
thank you.
I appreciate all of
Appreciate
your work.
listening.
How could people like reach out to you, or find more information about yourself and all the work that you do on Muse? What's the best way?
Well, certainly, you can visit Muse, which is musebyclio.com. I'm on Twitter at Nudd, Nudd. Tim.Nudd at ClioAwards.com if you want to shoot me a note. I get a lot of email, but I try to get to all of it. But yeah, I mean, Muse is sort of central to everything. The tagline episodes pop up there too when they're finished. So yeah, I would check out Muse first.
Perfect. Well, that's all I got. I appreciate you coming on.
Amazing. Thank you, Gino. This has been really fun.
Did you hear anything on this episode about a job you'd like to have someday, soon, in advertising, strategy, design? The kind of job where you use your brain and your creativity? If you did, chances are a portfolio can really help you get that job. That's where Chicago Portfolio School comes in. They have programs and classes that help you show off your thinking and get you the job you want. So visit them at chicagoportfolio.com. And if you drop my name, Gino, into the chat box, they'll send you more info and a cool Sharpie. Or just some more info. You can decide that. Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to this entire episode of the Breaking and Entering Advertising podcast. If you like what you heard, it would mean a lot to us and help us grow and get better guests and better break-ins if you can go to Apple Podcasts and leave us 5 stars and a small review if you have the time. Be sure to connect with our guests if you like what they said by going to our Instagram at Breaking and Entering Pod. That's all one word, Breaking and Entering Pod on Instagram. We have links to their portfolios and their LinkedIn, and they want to connect, so do that. And thank yous. Thank you to Mikey Malarkey, our audio engineer, and Buchan Zhang, our creative director. Can't do it without you two, and a team from the University of Illinois. It's a student team from the agency called AdBuzz. They're a PR agency, and it's been a pleasure working with them. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next week with another amazing guest.